Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this presentation. I pray that you will find it worthy of your time. I know that most of us have never experienced a more challenging time than the last 5 months. Some of us have lost family members or friends to the most vicious virus that's been introduced in our environment in our lifetime. Many of us or our loved ones have lost their jobs and have experienced a reduction in work hours, business closures, and are now facing financial insecurity. All of the societal systems that we have believed in are now, all of our lives are under attack and vulnerable to failure. The stress points that we are living with are enough to break down the sanity of the strongest mind and the sanctity of the strongest believers. As believers, we have to maintain a certain level of strength and faith to get us through these tough times. As we struggle with finding solutions to end this new and most dangerous health crisis, we are confronted with an overwhelming number of pressing issues that need resolution. The negative impact of disparities among the races is being played out on a daily basis and has shown that acts that were thought to have ended years ago are still being perpetrated against oppressed people. As covert racist acts are becoming more overt and people are becoming more comfortable exemplifying racist behavior, solutions to bringing harmony among the races are critical to the survival of this country, if not the world. As racism continues to raise its ugly head, these crimes against humanity can no longer be overlooked or dismissed as non-existent. Such crimes have existed since the beginning of time. We should be thankful that we have an opportunity to now realize that more work needs to be done on each of our parts to bring about racial harmony. Finally, the strength of our economy is dependent upon all of the above mentioned issues and more. Since the strength of our economic system is reliant to a very large degree upon these issues, it is critical that we understand how we impact the fragility of our economy. We should be thankful that the weaknesses in our economy have been revealed to us and have faith that our leaders will come to a meeting of the minds that results in a strengthened economy. The answers are before us. We have the Bible, the scriptures of the Bible, to look at as examples of improprieties and injustices that have been occurring throughout the course of time. We have the Book of Mormon. Again, these are history books that tell us, they detail personal stories of people who have been impacted by racism, that have been impacted by health issues. The answers are there. And even though this is a trying time for all of us, I know some of us are feeling overwhelmed, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement. You've never seen anything like it before for the most part. And even many of you that are my age have not seen anything like this. I am 74 years old, going on 75, and I remember days when the political atmosphere in this country was very, very hostile and toxic, just like it is now. I haven't seen a time since the 60s and 70s that we have experienced these types of things that we are experiencing now. All my life, I've heard the phrase, when it rains, it pours. Without a doubt, for most of us, it appears that our whole world, personally and holistically, is under attack, and there is no way out. But we must remember that behind every dark cloud, there is a silver lining. Like Esther, we must have faith that these challenges are to make us stronger, and that we will survive regardless of what we are confronted with. The answers to all these problems can be found again in our Bible and the Book of Mormon. I've asked to make this presentation about Esther. When I was asked to make this presentation about Esther, one of the women of the Bible, I must admit that it's been a while since I had read the book of Esther. And I must also admit that I didn't understand a lot of it. And even though I thought I did, it wasn't until this reading that I really got to realize the magnitude and the depth of Esther and what her courageous acts meant. I have to tell you that I was praying because I didn't want to come to you and not really know the topic and know the depth of Esther. So I was praying that God would give me a better understanding of who she was. And I kept reading the book, and I was still confused about a lot of issues. And I do believe in prayer, the power of prayer. I was praying, and one day, one of my independent contractors who does junk hauling for us, came into the shop, and he had a box of things that he was getting ready to take to the dump. But he said that they were books, and he knows what an avid reader I am. And he said, I thought you might want to go through and look at these books. Well, as I was going through the box, about the third or fourth book that I picked up was, I had planned on bringing it to you and showing that book to you, but I left it at home. I'm at one of my students' houses because I don't have the skills to show these slides to you. So anyway, the book was entitled Women of the Bible. And that was the title of this series of lectures. And I thought, I stopped what I was doing immediately and thanked God, because that was the answer. He provided me with what I needed most. I would read like any other challenging book or document that I read. It takes multiple readings and deep analysis before I can comprehend most of the messages of the story. And Esther was definitely a challenge for me in terms of understanding. So being an A-type person that I am, and wanting people to think that I'm really smart, I realized after reading the book that I had been gifted by God, that Esther was a very deep person. The more I read the Book of Mormon, the book of the Bible, the scriptures, the more confused I was getting until that book was put in my hands. I had even gone to our website to look to see what else I could find out about Esther, and nothing was as good as that book that was delivered to me. And unfortunately, I can't show you the book. I started to not only understand the power within Esther, but the power of faith, prayer, and fasting. How faith and obedience can change the world, if even just for a short period of time. Esther's acts of courage and her faith in Heavenly Father did not eliminate racism or the desire of the hearts of all world leaders that have come to power to eliminate hatred and the desire to commit genocide. In fact, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, and our history and political books are full of stories about leaders who hate and leaders who desire the elimination of whole races of people. The world that we live in does not exempt us from those type of leaders. From the beginning of time, we've had leaders who thought little of people who were not like them. Our best hope is to continue to pray and have faith that God will deliver us from such evil by empowering us and such leaders to do what his commandments teaches us to do, and that is to do the right thing. As I previously stated, it took me several readings to understand the power of this young orphaned girl, Esther. Without any real knowledge of Esther's age, we know that she was very young. We know that she was under the care of her cousin Mordecai, whom it is said adopted her as his niece. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to try to share this. Can you get Dalvin Carmen? Dalvin. The first of the slides, I need you to pull up the slide presentation for me. The first of the slides. Just one more. I made these slides, this presentation, to help us understand the timeline and characters that impacted not only her life, but the lives of the entire 127 provinces that her husband, Xerxes, had dominion and reigned over. Okay, the first slide is, I want you to take a look at what I have here and think about what is a Bible and what is a Book of Mormon. They're both history books, and they detail problems that we had during this time when Esther was alive. Unfortunately, many of the problems that existed during Esther's life on earth still exist to this day. And we've seen many of those problems multiply, scenes being played out in our streets today that, frankly, I had not seen since the 70s and 80s. We've seen over the years many scenes similar to the George Floyd scene, but we've heard of many killings of young Black males, but we have not seen anything like what we're seeing now since in my lifetime. Even the 70s was not as toxic and fearful for Blacks as it is now. Let me go to slide 2. I started to not just understand the power within Esther, but the power of faith, prayer, and fasting as I read about Esther. Esther was the queen of Persia. She was more or less a Babylonian goddess. Both books are full of human stories about Esther. Now, the Book of Mormon has a story that is similar. It parallels a woman. I wanted to know whom in the Book of Mormon was similar to Esther. So the person that I called to get this information was Joe McMarron, because he's a librarian. He's like a librarian. He knows all of the answers about the Book of Mormon and the scriptures as well. So he told me about this lady, Abish, and she was, what she dealt with was very much the same as what Esther had to deal with. It was the annihilation of their entire race of people, and these were different periods of time. So we understand from history that there have been times when large numbers of people have been targeted to be eliminated from the earth. And I think that LDS members, more than anyone else, should understand the impact of that, because when Joseph Smith was on this earth, he and our church were targets. In the early 1800s, Joseph Smith was a man who believed in equity, fairness, and equality. He did not believe in slavery. He advocated against slavery. He ran as president of this United States on a platform to eliminate slavery and pay reparations. And that was one of the reasons that I personally believe, and I am a historian by heart and nature, I personally believe that he was the target because of his position. More so than his religious ideas was the idea of eliminating slavery. And that made him, as well as our church, a target. That is one of the reasons that the church members had to move from one place to the other. That is the reason, in my opinion, that Joseph Smith was murdered. So, going on, let's go to the next one. Who was Esther? Esther was an orphan. She was living in a society that did not accept her. She was a Jew, and her cousin, Mordecai, was her guardian. We don't know how old, at least I didn't find how old Esther may have been. I'm assuming that she was a very young girl, maybe 14 to 17 years old. She was still under the guidance of her cousin when she became the most powerful person in the Middle East. Prior to Esther being Queen of Persia, the Queen of Persia was Vashti. Vashti too was a young woman who was the most powerful woman in the society. Her husband reigned over 125 provinces. This made her a well-known person, a well-known character. In our day and time, she would be known as a rock star, more or less, like the Kardashians or something along that nature. In the third year of the king's reign, he celebrated for 7 days of drinking wine. So whereas the Bible doesn't really say he got drunk, we know what 7 days of drinking might do to the mind. And as a result, he sent for his wife, Vashti, to come to him. And he wanted to show her off because of her beauty, not because he loved her, not because he respected her or anything of that nature. So she rejected his call. And you just didn't do that to the king. But unfortunately, the king had counselors who encouraged him to punish Vashti because they felt that if she went unpunished, that their wives too would start doing the same and treating them in the same manner that Vashti had treated her husband, the king. So it doesn't say whether he killed Vashti or anything of that nature. The Bible is very, very vague about what happened to Vashti. If any of you know what happened to Vashti, please let it be known, because that's one of the things that I am really inquisitive to know. Nevertheless, as a result, the king got rid of Vashti one way or the other. But he had to find someone else. Let's move on to the next slide, okay? So a search was conducted to find another queen. And it took 12 months. The king sent his counselors out to find other women that could possibly fit that role. They don't say how many women, but they said that it's a large number of women that were brought to his castle, and they were screened to be the next queen. 12 months, after waiting there 12 months, Esther was elevated to the title of queen. The king saw her, he liked her beauty, and he made her his queen. My feeling about Esther's relationship with her husband was that it wasn't probably a good relationship. I think that she felt like so many women back then, that it was her role and they just accepted things as it was. But I think she had some self-doubt about how much the king loved her, but nevertheless, she fulfilled that role. I need to try to move on to the next slide. Okay. Hey, Alan, I need the next slide, please. Things are happening in the world now that we have never seen before. And it's easy for us to feel frustrated, especially since we're staying at home and have been at home all these months, have not been able to see our friends and relatives, not being able to get a hug or a kiss from them. It's been really tough on people, and some people are feeling very much overwhelmed. And when they hear of things like what's going on in our street, a lot of them are panicking and thinking that we're going to go back to the days when things were really bad. Another thing that's happening is people are scared for their livelihood because so many people have lost jobs. In the day of Esther, people were just as overwhelmed because so many things were going on in their society. Can you imagine how the Jews felt? Because they were the targeted people. In so many societies, they were the targeted people. They knew that that there were systems and people out to cause pain, great pain to them, and people who just hated them. Esther grew up as an orphanage in a foreign land. 100 years prior, the Jews had been forced out of their homeland into Babylonia. And so when the king needed a wife, Esther's cousin Mordecai told her not to reveal that she was a Jew. So that was a little deceit that was going on then. And it caused me to think about, these are the good people in the Bible that are keeping secrets, that are telling lies, because to not reveal your heritage was a lie. But why? Sometimes you have to think, why did she do that? And why did Mordecai tell her to? Was it to save their life? We don't know how intense hatred was back there in those times. They obviously were very, very rough times, rough periods for people. Let's move on to the next one. Mordecai had a lot of self-pride, and the king had promoted a man to his counselor, over his counselors, by the name of HAMAN. And HAMAN was upset with Mordecai because every time he would enter an area, Mordecai would not kneel down before him. So he felt that Mordecai was disrespecting him. But by the same token, he thought that he was very much favored, and he was, by the king and Esther. Maybe Esther not so much, but certainly the king really favored Haman. So Haman decided that Mordecai and all of the Jewish people needed to be killed. And Haman convinced the king to issue a decree to kill all the Jews, simply because he felt that Mordecai, a Jew, did not respect him. Now, how sick is that? The other thing I looked at was how weak of a king was the king, because he was so easily influenced. First, he was easily influenced by his counselors to get rid of his first wife because she refused to come and show herself at his party after 7 days of drinking. Then he was so easily convinced by Haman to issue a decree to kill all the Jewish people in his 127 provinces. I think that that's pretty bad. Once Mordecai found out that a decree had been issued to kill all of the Jews, he had to convince Esther of that. To go, he talked with her to ask her to go talk to the king to have mercy on them. But Esther was very afraid. How afraid would you be? I know I would be really afraid, because number one, I wouldn't really know if he loved me because I hadn't seen him prior to that. She had not seen the king for 30 days. And if you're a person's husband, a wife, you expect to see him, or him to see you. She could only see the king when the king wanted to see her. This is what her response to Mordecai was. For any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he be put to death. Gosh, that's pretty stringent. Just because you would be put to death just because you entered the courtyard of the king without his permission to come in. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. Now, if the king decided that he didn't want you to live because you had violated his law of coming into his courtyard, then he could kill you. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. This is what Esther responded. Mordecai's response to Esther can be read in Esther 4:13 through 17. Now, I'm not reading all of the scripture to you, but I really encourage you to read that, because it's some powerful words there. It's some powerful activity going on there. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. This is strictly from the book, from the verse. Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all other the Jews. Can you kind of slide that over a little? I don't have to, it's in front of me. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So in other words, he's telling her that if she keeps silent, then she might be next. This reminds me of a poem that was written by a German priest about the Holocaust victims. Another time when the Jewish people had been targeted for extinction, and that was by Hitler. And this poem is one of the PowerPoints can we go to the next one and see if it's there? This poem talked about being silent. Oh, okay, that's okay. This poem talked about the impact of silence when you see wrong being perpetrated against people and you choose to keep your mouth shut and say nothing about it and try to do nothing about it. Don't advocate for people to change or to address the issue with people, just to be quiet. And I noticed that during the Black Lives Matters demonstrations, many of the people, particularly the white people who were demonstrating for equity and justice, were carrying signs that said that things to the nature that silence is complicity. So if you keep quiet, you're being complicit, and you might be quiet now about it, but someday you might be the person that is being attacked. So that's a message that Mordecai said. That's a message that a priest in Germany wrote when he was a socialist. He wasn't even a Jew when he wrote this poem. And we know that silence is complicity. Esther's plan of survival. Esther ordered, she had to ponder this. She had to have been very frightened of the impact of what might happen. She ordered all Jews throughout the 127 provinces to fast for 3 days. She also decided that she would fast also for 3 days. That showed that she had faith in fasting. The fact that she was willing to die for her people or her cause meant that she had turned the problem over to Heavenly Father. Now, she didn't immediately tell Mordecai that she was going to do what he had requested, but she prayed about it, and then she fasted. And along with her fasting were all the people in those provinces. Let's go to the next one. Esther was empowered by the prayers of her fasting and her faith in Heavenly Father. I want you to concentrate on that. Look at it and think about that for a minute. How was she empowered? What gave her the courage to speak up and take the risk to go to her husband without being asked and invited in, knowing full well what the law for entering in his presence would be without having been invited. So let's go on to the next one. Esther 4:15 through 17. Then Esther bade them, return Mordecai's this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in until the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. On the 3rd day of fasting, Esther approached the king. Only 3 days, on the 3rd day of fasting. As soon as he saw her, keep in mind, she probably was trembling like a leaf on a tree. I know I would have been, but she had decided that that was what God had prompted her to do. So she approached him. He held out the golden scepter. So that meant that she would not be killed. He asked her what she wanted, and he even, I know it probably put her a little bit at ease when he told her that he would even give up half of his kingdom for her. So the issue of love that he had for her was probably no longer an issue for her. She displayed great courage in the midst of a crisis. Prior to risking her life for her people, She humbled herself by fasting. Do we ever fast for things that we want? I say that because this is one of the things that the Bible, as well as the Book of Mormon, tells us to do. That if we want things to change, if we want to change the hearts of people, we have to do certain things. And fasting is one of those things. Okay. Esther, you can go on. Esther did not allow her fears of confronting the most powerful man in the territory provinces to prevent her from doing what was right. Now, Haman, let's get back to Haman and take a look at what he did. Haman convinced the king to decree that all Jews were to be annihilated or killed. He had gallows built for them to be killed on. When Haman threw the lot, now this is very interesting. Haman threw what is called the lot or the pur to discover what day would be the best day to kill all the Jews. And it took, pur or lot is like, this is what I struggled with, and I had to ask about and really do some searching on the internet to find out what that meant, because I just didn't remember. But what it is a chance. It's a game of chance. It might be like rolling a dice. So you do something of that nature it's a kind of a superstition to determine things for you. So he determined that March 7th would be the best time to kill everyone. And that was going to be 11 months from the day that he rolled through the pur. Now, the slide you're looking at now is, I wanted to know who in the LDS Church can compare to Esther. And of course, Joe McMarron told me a name, and I searched those names, and I searched the internet, and I found Emmeline B. Wells. She was a LDS member, and she was an advocator for women's rights during the women's rights movement. Now, she was a very good friend of Susan B. Anthony and all of the other people who advocated for women's rights. And the interesting thing about women's rights is they were all abolitionists. They fought for the rights of slaves to be free. And Emmeline was one of those people. And I read about her on the internet. I encourage all of you to go on the internet and read about her. Very interesting person. If you know the history of the times and what was going on during the times that she was fighting for women's suffrage, you would know that these women fought just as adamantly to end slavery as they did for the rights of women. Because of Emmeline Wells, Utah came into the Union and was the first state in the Union to allow women to vote, and that was because of Emmeline Wells. That was a courageous woman too. She fasted, she prayed, she fought for spoke up for what she felt was wrong, regardless of who she had to, as an adversary. You know, you can imagine that back then, our church was probably not very supportive of Emmeline Wells in many ways, because when our church started out, they were abolitionists. Along the way, and I have no hesitancy to say this, Brigham Young reversed that type of philosophy about helping blacks. Brigham Young changed the entire structure of our church as it relates to Black people, not only as it related to freeing of the slaves, as Joseph Smith had advocated for, but he even allowed people to join the church who owned slaves. So you take a look at the times, and a lot of people say, well, back in that day, things were really tough for the church. Things were really tougher for our church when Joseph Smith was alive than it was when Brigham Young was alive, to the point where Joseph Smith was killed because of his beliefs, and particularly when he started advocating for the freeing of the slaves, because that was messing with the economy of the entire country. Our entire country relied upon the economy of the slaves. And when our prophet, Joseph Smith, started advocating to release these people, people didn't like that. There was a lot of hate, and there was a lot of hate in the hearts of people for Joseph Smith. I am really proud of what Emmeline Wells has done, and I'm proud of the church. It's recognizing her and giving a museum. It's recognizing her. She's recognized as one of Utah's greatest leaders of women's suffrage. And to do all in my power, she said, her words was to do all in my power to help elevate the condition of my own people, especially women. We can say that Esther was that same type of person. Esther elevated not only the role of women and recognition that women got, but she also elevated race relations, because after what she did, people wanted to be Jewish. People who were not Jewish were claiming to be Jewish. So this woman, Emmeline, helped dispel stereotypes of LDS women. In addition to writing for the Exponent, that was like a newspaper, Wells contributed to women's papers in the Eastern U.S., helping to dispel many misconceptions about Latter-day Saint women. At a time when women across the U.S. did not have many opportunities, Wells explained that Latter-day women could vote, were educated at local colleges, worked in professions, headed their own organizations, and contributed to the economic welfare of their communities. So we should be proud to have an Esther in our church. There were other people who have been recognized and done great work when it comes to advocating for women's suffrage. Utah, as a result of their work, Utah's Constitution recognized women and allowed them to vote. So it was the first state to do so. I want you to look at a song. Most of you may have heard this song. Those of you who are long-term LDS members, I'm sure you have, because I'm a relatively new convert, and I've heard it, and it's been one of my favorite, but I didn't really know why. If you look at the history of our country, abolitionists during 1857, it is said that this song was written between 1850 and 1857. It was published in Boston, and Boston was one of that was the last, pretty much the last before Canada. There were basically three places that slaves in this country, runaway slaves went to. They went to, their goal was to get to Ohio, then Massachusetts, and then Canada. And the Underground Railroad was through those areas. And this song was written during that time when that was a really, really, really big issue of the day. The freeing of the slaves was the the advocacy and the problems that were encountered in this country was a whole lot greater than what we're facing now. Now, these people had such loving hearts that they risked their lives and the lives of their families to free slaves. And we have to, this song that is one of our songs, and I'm thinking that it was probably written by one of our church members. Do what is right. The day dawn is breaking, hailing a future of freedom and light. Angels above us are silent notes taken of every action. Then do what is right. Those are prolific words. Do what is right. Let the consequence follow. Esther didn't care about the consequences she knew the consequence would be death. She accepted it. She said, if I perish, I perish. Battle for freedom in spirit and might, and with stout hearts look ye forth till tomorrow. God will protect you. Then do what is right. Do what is right. The shackles are falling. Shackles were the chains around slaves. This song is about slavery, and it's about freeing of the people. Chains of the bondsmen no longer are bright. Lightened by hope, soon they'll cease to be gowan. Truth goeth onward, then do what is right. Do what is right, be faithful and fearless. Esther was a fearless woman. She cast aside all of her fears to do what was right. Onward, press onward. The goal is in sight. Eyes that are wet now, ere long will be tearless. Blessings await you in doing what's right. I will have, when I next hear that song, it's sung in our church, I will have a much better understanding of what it was. When I saw that it was written in the 50s, that was a really bad time in our country because it was so much division about the Civil War started in 1865. The Proclamation Emancipation was written in 1962. That's when slaves were supposedly officially freed, 1962. So when you look at 1862, when you look at the fact that this song was written in 1857, these were abolitionists who wrote this song, whomever they were. And since it is our church is the only one that I know sings this song, and I've been to a lot of churches, and I've never heard that song sung before I joined our church. It's my best guess that it was written by LDS, who was also an abolitionist. We have, as our church, done remarkable things to shorten the divide between the races. When our church purchased the Freedmen's Bureau papers, that was a big step forward, an absolute, incredible step that our church took so that Black people could know the history of their ancestors and do their work. When I was not an LDS member and I was a member of the African Methodist Church, I always felt, because this was the consensus of the Black population, is that LDSers did family history so that they would know who was Black, so they wouldn't admit them to their church. That was what we were told. And it wasn't until I became a member that I understood why family history is so important. It was always important to me because I'm just a historian and I love reading history. But when I see and saw the impact that allowed Black people to research their family histories beyond slavery, I cried because it means so much to be able to do that. The feeling that you have when you are able to go back that far and see who your ancestors really were is an incredible feeling. Now, it is said that our church members are the most racist members in America. I don't find that to be the case. Our church, in fact, when other churches were denying blacks the entrance into their church, at least blacks could go inside of our church and worship right next to a white person. The ME Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Lutheran Church, all of the churches, none of them allowed blacks to go in and worship with white parishioners, and in the South as well as other parts of the country. That is why we have churches that have African titles, African American titles. The AME Church, for instance, that's African Methodist Church. It's not American Methodist Church, it's African Methodist Church. And why? Because that's where people of African descent had to go worship. The Baptists also would not allow blacks to worship in their sanctuaries. The LDSers members could do that. Also, LDSers, the LDS Church did allow, there were blacks who had the priesthood under Joseph Smith. So even when Brigham Young changed that order, then decreed that people of African descent could no longer receive the priesthood, they could still go in and worship in the church. Now, I know that some people have told me about the reception that they get at certain places when they go outside. Now, I guess Oakland has a really good reputation for acceptance. I would like to see all of our wards accept people, just as you can put me back on, just as I would like to see all people accepted just as they are when they come to the 9th Ward. Now, this is the poem. What you're looking at now is the poem that was written by the priest from Hitler's era. And this was specifically regarding the massive killings that Hitler was doing. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Now, that's the sense that Esther obviously feared. She obviously felt that if she didn't speak up, no one could. I am really pleased about the direction that our church is going in. Our Prophet Nelson has put out a statement of love. He wants us to love each other. Division is not going to bring our church, it's not going to hold our church together, people. It's not going to bring more people into our church. Our church, as far as I'm concerned, should be the #1 church that Black people are going to. And I know some of you are saying, well, you know, there's a lot of Blacks who come in and we end up having to take care of them because they don't have this or that, but that's what God tells us to do. We have to look at why this person or that person does not have the same resources that someone of a different race might have. And when you take it upon, I'm going to read this. This is what I learned from Esther. When you take it upon yourself to commit evil acts, when you fail to forgive, when you choose to hate, when you fail to allow Heavenly Father to take charge of your life, you open the door to be the victim of your own evil ways. Now, HAMAN took it upon himself to try to annihilate the entire population of Jews. Hey, now, can you get me back home? Now, he took it upon himself to do that. And the tables were turned because, the tables were turned, you can get them back to me, because he himself was hung. Well, those gallows were used to kill him. When Esther told her husband what she wanted, he listened. He finally listened. Obviously, he had learned to love her by then and developed some type of respect for women, and particularly her. And he listened. And when you commit evil things, some people call it karma. Whatever you call it, evil deeds are going to be rewarded with evil deeds. And so Haman instead of him killing the Jews, that day that he was meant for all of the Jews to be annihilated is now one of the most celebrated days in the Jewish culture. And it's even called the Day of Esther, and how fitting for that to be. I hope that you will ponder some of these questions that you see before you. Was the king easily manipulated? Yes. Is our current government, and all governments, I'm a politician, a political student and historian, and yes, all throughout the course of history, all governments leaders have been easily manipulated. That's the role of many people in our society, is to cause confusion within our government and the people. And the role of the government is to control the people. So with all of that, I hope that you will ponder some of the questions that you saw before you. I hope that you will be able to better dispel some of the questions that you're getting now, because I know a lot of you are being bombarded with questions about the Black Lives Matter. Why do you have to have Black lives? Everybody's life matters. Well, everybody's life does matter. And
amen.
And we're not saying that nobody's life does not matter. We want everybody to understand the hatred that has been perpetrated against Black people for over 400 years of slavery, and then another almost 200 years of freedom. We still are suffering, we're still being hung, and those hangings are being contributed to suicide. We know better. It's happened too long in our society. It had gone away, but with this current administration, I'm going to come right out and say it, there has been a resurgence of hate crimes throughout this country, not only for Blacks, but Jewish people as well. And not only for Jewish people, but immigrants as well. So we need to, as LDS church members, we need to recognize history, historical facts, deal with historical facts. Look at your own self. All of us are prejudiced. We all have some biases. We've grown up with them. We were born with them, as we weren't born with them, but we developed them at very young ages. And some of those biases were covert. We don't even know that we have them. So start by analyzing your own feelings and your own actions towards others. You might have a Black friend or two, but how do you view people in general? When you see a young Black man walking down the street, do you hide your purse? Do you start grabbing onto it? Do you, does your blood pressure increase? These are the things that we really need to analyze. And I know that most of you are good people and you think that there is no racism, but there is. And There are people who have sent me messages of, and I don't want to make this a political thing because it isn't. It's just a truth of how Black people have been treated in this country. It's a truth about how Jewish people have and still are treated in this country. A lot of people don't want to admit that Jewish people are still victims of racism, but they are in many ways. And we need to take a look. If you have some animosities towards Latinos, you need to take a look at that. You need to take a look at it, and you need to pray about it. You need to fast about it, and you need to change your attitude to love. And I know that one of the things that I know some of our church members have said to me is they're concerned about this upcoming election because they're concerned that it might cause a rift or division among the people of our wards, not just my ward, but all of the wards, the church in general. And it's up to us to not allow that to happen. Everybody is entitled to their opinions, and everybody is going to have an opinion, and sometimes it's not going to be the same as your opinion. We still have to love each other, and that is what our prophet Munson preached, and that is what our prophet Nelson has recently submitted a paper on. So please, I beg of you, get inside of yourself, analyze your own feelings, yourself, do a self-reflection, and be honest about it. Nobody's going to hate you because you're honest about your feelings. We all have them. I know some Black people that are more prejudiced than most of the white people I know. And understand this, whites have always participated in our movements. The media is trying to make this movement seem like it's the first time a large number of white people have participated to help us. If that were so, we would still be in slavery because the slaves surely did not free themselves. When you go to Andersonville, you go to Gettysburg, you go to Jackson, Mississippi, you go to Vicksburg, Mississippi, and you see all those gravestones, those crosses that are there. And white people, white men are buried there trying to get Black people free. So don't let this be the media convince you that this is the first time that whites have participated in such movements. When Paul Robeson was leading efforts for civil rights, he came right here to Oakland. And I have a picture of the massive group of people that showed up for a rally here in Oakland way back in the early 50s. And you see hundreds of people, thousands of people, and you don't see hardly a Black face in there. And they came out to hear Paul Robeson talk about equity and parity for Blacks. So what you need to do is the right thing. You need to analyze your own biases. You need to understand where those biases are coming from. And you need to know that a lot of them came from external information that you heard, not information, not personal experiences. You need to pray that you can learn how to accept everybody, each and every one, for whom they are, not the color of their skin. You want to accept them for their character, not what you think their character is. And Black people need to do the same. Asians need to do the same. Latinos need to do the same. Racial biases is in every culture. And we're not going to stop it until we do what Esther did. We have to pray, we have to fast, we have to accept each other and love each other. And that is all that I have to say at this time. If you want more, I am a historian. I do a lot of writing about this topic. I do a lot of lectures on it. And I just feel free to text me or preferably email me or call me, and we'll have discussions. And if you have someone who wants more answers than I was able to deliver here today, please do that. We need to do some race relations in our church. Our wards need race relations, and it's not a frightening thing. Race relations in the 70s was every company and many churches and the military, every form of government did race relations workshops. And that's why we made the strides that we made from the 60s to now. I don't want to see us go back to the 60s. And the atmosphere that is being created in our current election is worse than it was when I was a child of 10 and George Wallace and Thurman and a lot of other racists were leading our country. So love each other, guys.